Hey guys, Dr. Bodle here. And if you've done any amount of research into Hashimoto's, you've probably come across the idea of going gluten-free to help improve your symptoms. In fact, some research has suggested that there's such a strong connection between gluten consumption and Hashimoto's that anyone with positive thyroid antibodies should at least experiment with going gluten-free. However, despite this well-known physiological relationship, most people who go gluten-free tend to fail. And in this video, we're going to talk about why that is. That way you can avoid those same mistakes. Now, to be clear, we're not exactly sure why people with Hashimoto's tend to struggle so much with gluten and why it has the potential to be a trigger to your immune system. We know that people with celiac disease, which is a condition where people develop inflammation and damage to their small intestine whenever they consume gluten, and people with Hashimoto's have similar genotypes, which might then cause their immune systems to react in similar ways to the gluten that they're eating. There's also a theory that some of the proteins within gluten have an amino acid sequence that looks like the amino acid sequence in some of the enzymes in our thyroid gland, particularly our TPO enzyme. Since TPO is a common target for autoimmune activity in people with Hashimoto's, which is why most people with Hashimoto's have positive TPO antibodies on their blood labs, it's possible that some people could be experiencing reactions to gluten due to a phenomenon called cross-reactivity. Essentially, because those antibodies fit to a particular protein sequence or structure, if we already have antibodies developed for those enzymes in our thyroid, and those enzymes look like some of the protein sequences in gluten, then it's thought that anytime we're exposed to gluten, those antibodies can react to both and therefore perpetuate the autoimmunity. Lastly, as a general rule, our immune system isn't a huge fan of large, complex proteins coming into our digestive tract, or at least coming into the later parts of our digestive tract. If we're eating food, that food should be broken down into its component parts. And once it reaches that stage, it can either be absorbed into the system or excreted out. However, if there's a complex protein that is resisting digestion, then our immune system often thinks, you know what? That might be some sort of virus or bacteria that's trying to infect our body and cause us harm. So rather than sitting back and waiting for that infection to take hold, our immune system would rather be proactive and do whatever it can to protect us. When it comes to gluten and other food complexes like it, these are large protein molecules that tend to be difficult to break down in general. So if we take something like gluten that needs a little bit more oomph for our digestive tract to handle it, and we put it into a modern world where maybe most of us don't have a digestive system that's functioning at 100%, then you can see how that could lead us to eating gluten, having it not be broken down into those basic parts that we referred to before, and suddenly we have a large complex protein molecule rolling its way down our small intestine, and our immune system has to do something about it. This exposure then triggers the immune system and the cascade of inflammation that comes along with it. As for the case with most things related to chronic conditions, I think it's likely that there's multiple contributing factors here. But my job is to find ways to help people feel better. And although we can debate these different scientific philosophies, but it doesn't change the fact that many people are suffering now and we need to make some sort of change. The science might be settled eventually, but we don't want to wait for that to happen. At the end of the day, there's enough evidence in the research that shows us that something is there. But the real evidence comes from people making changes and noticing improvements in how they feel. What we want to do is take all of this information, then figure out how we can leverage it in a way that best supports you. But even though all of that makes perfect sense, people still tend to fail when they go gluten-free. Then they think, well, I tried that gluten-free thing and it didn't work, so I guess I don't really need to worry about it. And when they do that, they could be missing out on something that could potentially make a big difference for their health. Keep in mind that your response to gluten is going to be individualized. It's not a magic bullet as much as some people paint it to be. For some people, pulling out gluten could eliminate a number of their symptoms, and maybe when they have it, it completely wrecks how they feel. For others, It might be a small difference, something that's really hard for them to track, and they could have other triggers in their life that have a much more prominent role in their health. Maybe their stress levels are too high or they're not getting enough sleep. Maybe their sex hormones are off or they're deficient in key nutrients. But in any of those scenarios, even though gluten might not be magical, it still has the capacity to help, at least to some degree. So if we're going to remove it, we might as well do it right. The first reason why people aren't successful with going gluten-free is they're not consistent enough. We've all been trained to think about food in terms of moderation. It's not the particular food that's bad, instead, it's overeating that food. However, when it comes to gluten and Hashimoto's, we have to change the way that we approach things. And while having too much gluten can be a problem, for most people, it's the frequency with which that they're exposed. One of our big goals when it comes to removing foods is allowing our immune system to calm down and recover. But if we continue to ingest gluten, even in small amounts, with a high enough frequency, then the immune system is going to continue to be triggered, and that can sometimes be enough to perpetuate symptoms. Think of it like you're trying to fall asleep, but right before that happens, your child comes into your room and whispers, "Hey, I need a glass of water." Yes, they're being quiet and polite, but it's enough to disrupt that sleep process. Even though you might be having gluten just once a day or having a bite here or there, sometimes our immune system can be sensitive enough that that small amount is enough to disrupt the healing process. The second reason why people aren't successful when going gluten-free is that they're actually sensitive to other foods as well. For people who are sensitive, they can have significant inflammation in their gut. And this can have a spillover effect where we don't break down other foods very well, which can then lead to the development of sensitivities. So even though you're doing a good job with removing gluten, you might not notice a big difference in how you feel because you're eating other foods that are also causing you to react. As I've mentioned before, the way we want to approach nutrition is on a spectrum, and some people need to be more strict than others. If you're not seeing progress, but you think that food could be playing a big role in your thyroid health, then even though you're doing a good job with removing gluten, you might want to consider other foods as well. This could include things like other kinds of grains, soy products, or dairy, and even less common triggers like eggs, nightshades, and nuts and seeds. Now, I'm not saying that all of these things are bad, but they should be on your list of potential suspects. So keep a food journal, track your symptoms, and make changes when appropriate. And finally, the last and probably the most common reason why people fail with their gluten-free diet is they're consuming processed gluten-free foods. What's one of my biggest rules no matter what kind of diet you're following? You want to focus on whole foods that are minimally processed and minimally refined. This is why cooking at home can be such a great thing. But no matter how you prepare your food, if you focus on whole food ingredients, you are putting yourself in control of exactly what's going in your body. It's extremely common that when people first decide to go gluten-free, they don't suddenly switch to a whole foods diet that is naturally gluten-free. Instead, they go to the grocery store and look for products that are labeled as gluten-free. Now, this makes total sense. When we're doing something new, we want some guidance and some assurance that we're following the rules. But the problem here is, and many of you may have learned this already, is that most of the time when a food is labeled as gluten-free, it's gone through a lot of processing and modification to allow it to receive that designation. Carrots are gluten-free, but you don't see a big sticker stuck on them that says, "New carrots, now gluten-free." No, of course not. And that's because carrots never had gluten in the first place. But if you're a big food company that's looking to capitalize off of people's efforts and their concerns, well, you can be sure that they're going to make sure that you know that their new bread is gluten-free. And they're going to put a label right up front so you can see it. But with this modification comes a bit of a risk for the consumer. Sure, maybe that bread is a better option for you than the standard bread, but now there's a bunch of processed grains in there and you might not know how your body handles them. There could be a significant amount of added sugar, and not to mention, there's now probably a bunch of stabilizers and preservatives to make sure that that food doesn't spoil. How do you account for all these things? Well, you can't. And going from a diet that is mostly processed and switching that to a mostly processed but gluten-free diet, yes, there could be some benefits in there, but a processed diet is still a processed diet. And again, no matter what your health situation is, if you continue to eat those processed foods, it's likely going to limit your ability to make improvements. But I hope that you liked today's video, and if you have any questions, thoughts, or experiences that you'd like to share, make sure to drop them in the comments, and we can keep the conversation going. If you like this video but need more help, and you're looking for someone to guide you through all the ins and outs of transforming and improving on your Hashimoto symptoms, then send an email to contact@seattlethyroidhelp.com with course in the subject line. Once we hear from you, my staff will reach out and set up a free consultation. That way you and I can talk one-on-one and make sure that my upcoming course is a good fit for you. In the course, my focus is to help women with Hashimoto's who aren't getting help from their doctors, want to make changes but don't know where to start, go from feeling tired, exhausted, and discouraged to making nutritional, lifestyle, and supplemental choices with confidence. That way they can feel vibrant, strong, and love their lives again. So if that's something that's interesting to you, make sure to reach out, as the first iteration of the course will be taught live by me and include live support. If at the moment you'd rather keep on learning on your own, then I'd recommend checking out some of the other videos and playlists right here on my YouTube channel. Follow me on Instagram or Facebook for daily information, or by grabbing either one of my free downloads, which are listed in the description box. But that's it for this week. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourself, and don't forget to keep on learning and keep on advocating for yourself. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. But my name is Dr. Brad Bodle. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will see you in the next one.